Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is facing more pressure today to sit down with Canada's premiers after a Tory opposition motion passed the House of Commons with NDP support. The motion calls on Trudeau to urgently heed the call from several of the country's premiers to sit down and hash out alternatives to the current carbon pricing system. The Prime Minister's response to date, he already met with premiers when the pollution pricing plan was first drafted back in 2016. Let's bring in MPs to debate whether that meeting should take place. With me here in studio, Leah Taylor-Roy is a Liberal MP representing Ontario. Next to her is Laurel, the NDP's environment critic, and next to her is Andrew Scheer, the Conservatives House Leader. Hi to all of you. Thank you very much for making the time. We have a bit of a different seating order just for everybody who's used to watching this because of arrivals and arrival time, so don't read anything into it, everybody. But I'll start with the government and with Ms. Taylor-Roy. Thanks for making the time. I'm old enough to remember when it was Justin Trudeau, the leader of the third party at the time, harshly criticizing then Prime Minister Stephen Harper for not meeting frequently enough with the premiers. It was a main line of attack during the 2015 campaign. Why is it any different now?
I don't think it's different, but I think this particular meeting that's being requested is being done completely for political purposes. I think that, if the premiers were really serious about battling climate change and reducing greenhouse gases, they'd come forward with some suggestions. As of right now, there's been nothing put forward. And as we all know, the federal backstop program is in place because the provinces failed to put in programs on their own. So it was agreed upon to have these programs. It is shown to be not only the most efficient from an economic perspective, but also the most affordable when you include, of course, the Canada carbon rebates.
So everybody, every premier who is saying there has to be a more affordable, better way to still reach our targets is what, completely not basing any of that on fact, completely wrong? Because that includes one of your Liberal colleagues, Premier Andrew Scheer.
Sure. I think people are hopeful. I think the premiers are hopeful. But as we heard Scott Moe say, he's looked at all the alternatives. There's nothing more affordable. If we just realize...
That's on the industrial side. To be fair, he's talking about an industrial carbon price, not a consumer one.
But it's all one program. You can't separate the two because the industrial price is linked into the price on pollution, to the consumer price. And I think that you can't really take these apart because it works as a whole. And all of our estimates are based on both parts of that program.
Well, that's not entirely true, because when you look at the Canadian Climate Institute, just to follow up on that, Ms. Taylor-Roy, which recently did an outside analysis, 30% of the reductions were attributed to the industrial side, while only 8 to 9% were attributed to the consumer side. So they were able to break it apart to base their analysis. Why can't you just remove the consumer side and either strengthen the industrial side or do something else?
Because the industrial side is based off the price of pollution that is put on the consumer side. So this works together. And if you don't have the population moving forward, if you don't have consumers also changing their behavior, you're not going to get to where you need to go. I think this is all about price signals. And as we've seen, 250 economists signed on saying this is the best way to do it. And in fact, both members who are here with me support this program. So I don't understand.
Okay, let's bring in your colleague, Mr.
Sure.
Scheer, because I think what Ms. Taylor-Roy is alluding to is the fact that your party actually hasn't unequivocally said or denounced or said you'd remove the industrial side of the carbon tax. You've focused solely on the consumer side. So will you?
Well, if I could just address a few of the pieces of misinformation that we just heard from my Liberal colleague. You absolutely can separate them. The only reason why they're linked is because that's how the government linked the program. She talked about me already having, the Prime Minister has already met with the premiers. That was in 2016. None of the premiers who were at that meeting in 2016 hold office today. And, by the way, the program that they were briefed about from Justin Trudeau back in 2016 had a cap on the price on the carbon tax that he's since blown through. He's on his way to quadrupling the carbon tax. We know the carbon tax adds to the cost of everything while displacing jobs and investments to other countries who, by the way, are increasing their emissions. The government of India, Prime Minister Modi, just celebrated the fact that India has increased its coal production to over 1 billion tons. It's gone up 70% in just 10 years.
Does that absolve us from doing things to reduce our emissions?
That is, well, Justin Trudeau is saying no to exporting our LNG, which would help lower emissions. So this is the backwards approach. But
respectfully.
The point is, if the name of the game, if the goal is to reduce global emissions, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, then Canada absolutely should be exporting more of what will help do that. And we have a government here who says there's no business case for LNG while other countries are filling the market while they're raising the cost on Canadian consumers.
And I'll follow up with that in a second. But back to my initial question, which was substantively about whether or not a Conservative government would keep the industrial price on carbon, which isn't free for consumers, right? Taxes on companies are often, most of the time, if not always, transferred to consumers. Would your party keep that portion of the tax in place?
Well, the focus right now is on the carbon tax that people see
but
on
that's
their
not
heating
answering
bill,
my
on their
question,
grocery bill. There will be lots of time between now and the next election where Canadians can have analyze the plan. Justin Trudeau's plan to quadruple the carbon tax, to add even more to the cost of a litre of fuel, to make your home heating even more expensive, to drive up the cost of groceries, or our plan to axe the tax and bring those prices down.
But it is going to reduce emissions by 8 to 9%, Mr. Scheer. That's not nothing. And you're living in a scenario where we export LNG. China and India, let's say, are able to reduce their emissions as a result. I get that, but there's no system in that. But our emissions go up. What authority do we have?
But isn't
overall?
the goal to lower emissions on a global basis? If Canada slightly lowers ours by 9%, but China and India massively increase those,
but maybe there's a way to do both.
Undoing what we've done here, despite all the pain that the Trudeau government's putting Canadians through. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And this idea that this carbon tax, the carbon tax is not an environment plan. We have to stop talking about it as if it is. The last time Justin Trudeau hiked the tax on carbon, Canada dropped 4 spots in the Climate Change Performance Index. So it is not working. It's a tax plan, not an environment
we'll get into
plan.
that in a second because I know Ms. Taylor-Roy wants to respond, but I want to go to Ms. Collins because you actually were what everyone was watching for when this vote took place yesterday in the House of Commons. Would the NDP support the Conservatives' call for this meeting? And you did. And you also went on to say that the carbon tax, the consumer side of the carbon tax policy, is not the be-all, end-all. 2 weeks ago when I was asking you for your party's position, you were not clear. Can you be clear? Are you rejecting the consumer side of the carbon tax?
So I think you might have just misquoted me. What I said was the Liberals have been treating the consumer carbon tax as the be-all and end-all of climate policy.
I infer from that you don't think that it is.
And what I'm saying is that we should have a whole suite of climate policies to put forward, including carbon pricing. But you'll note that Mr. Scheer did not answer the question about industrial carbon pricing.
I did note that, but I'm asking you for an answer on the consumer side of the carbon price. And the government does have a full suite of measures in place.
Thank you. You know, the government has watered down their emissions cap, the industrial carbon pricing, the clean electricity regulations, the clean fuel regulations, and they have put up carbon pricing and the consumer side as their silver bullet, as their proof that they are credible on climate change. While they buy a pipeline that costs taxpayers $35 billion that we could have put into the full suite of climate solutions that we need. But on carbon pricing, we want to strengthen the industrial carbon pricing system. And we also acknowledge that carbon pricing, consumer carbon pricing, is one of our tools in our toolbox.
So you wouldn't get rid of it, to be clear?
We have not said we would scrap the consumer carbon price. We have never said that.
So you would keep it as it is?
I mean, right now we have a system that really makes the biggest polluters on the industrial side pay less than everyday Canadians. That's not fair. We definitely need to look at our carbon system and make sure that it's fair. Canadians. Suncor is paying 14 times less than everyday Canadians for the same pollution. And the bigger question here is why the Conservatives continue to fail to answer if they would scrap the industrial side. This is one of the most critical pieces of climate policy. You said 30%, but it's actually 30 to 48% of our emissions reductions come from the industrial side. I just came from the Environment Committee where they voted against bringing the CEOs of the wealthiest oil and gas companies to committee to ask questions about this.
And look, I asked Mr. Scheer, and I will continue to. Pretty much every time he's here, I'm asking him that same question. But I think it's also fair for me to ask of you the exact position of the NDP. And am I correct to interpret from what you said that you would keep the carbon tax and the plan that the Liberals have for it to increase to $170 a ton by 2030, but you would at the same time increase the industrial side? So you would not lower or get rid of the consumer carbon tax, to be clear on the NDP's position.
What I've said to you before, and I'll say it to you again, we would strengthen the industrial side. And with the consumer side, if the provinces come to us and have credible alternatives, we are all ears. If, you know, we already know that Quebec has a system of their own. If provinces want to come and actually have a credible plan that will meet our emission targets, Canadians are struggling with the cost of living and the climate crisis, and we need to tackle these head on.
It's a fair point, Ms. Taylor-Roy. I don't understand, and please help maybe Canadians understand, why your government is so wedded to the consumer side when you see all this opposition. And by the way, wasn't so wedded when it came to the heating oil in Atlantic Canada, but so wedded to this concept when provinces are saying, okay, we get it, we have to meet the targets. Can we just come to you with some alternatives? Why won't you even entertain that discussion?
No, we're willing to hear alternatives from the provinces. But remember, Blaine Higgs, he opted into the program a year ago. He's saying now, at the time he said it was a good thing. We've heard Daniel Smith say it made sense. We saw Doug Ford get rid of the cap and trade. But remember one thing, we're talking about affordability. And 8 out of 10 households receive more money back, especially lower income households, than they pay.
That's not taking into account the economic impact
Yes,
when you're referencing the parliamentary
economic impact.
officer.
Any program has an economic impact, which is exactly why the Conservatives don't talk about their program. If you're committed to fighting climate change, tell us what you're going to do. They keep saying technology. Well, technology is part of our suite of programs.
That's fair. It costs. But my question to you
is
is about why your government will not entertain alternatives. And you said you did, but that's not what the Prime Minister has been saying. He said that the Supreme Court decided we could impose this price on carbon. If you want to come back with your own price on carbon, you can. But that's not an alternative to the carbon tax.
No.
You're not entertaining an alternative. And I'm just curious as to why, if in fact the outcome is that the targets could be met. I understand the adherence to the targets, but if they can get a plan that gets them there, why not?
Because it will take every tool in our toolbox. And right now people are banking on things like CCUS, which may have an impact, which may help.
Your government is banking. You spent billions on it.
But that's one part of it. We also have to see consumer demand reduced. And we are giving back 8 out of 10 families more. So if we go to just an industrial-based system, if we get rid of the price on pollution as part of our program, and it's an integral part of it, then we are saying you will pay more through cap and trade or through industrial output pricing, but you won't get a rebate. Is that what we want at a time of an affordability crisis, to stop the rebates?
Mr. Scheer, I'll ask you on that point, because even putting aside analysis that's been done specific to the consumer carbon tax, the analysis that has been done on technology or sector-specific regulations to reduce emissions is that it is much more expensive for Canadians. Is that what your government, your party, pardon me, if you formed government, would do?
Like, there's been private sector proponents who wanted to engage in projects that would have had lower emissions. There was a famous one in Atlantic Canada that would have harnessed the power of ocean waves with a tidal energy project that couldn't get approval from this federal government. But the focus here is about having
subsidizing that technology too.
But they didn't allow it to go forward. They didn't allow LNG projects to go forward. They told our allies that there was no business case for it. When we know that getting other countries,
to be fair, there are some going forward, big ones.
But let's focus on the motion that passed. Why won't Justin Trudeau just meet with the premiers? What is he so afraid of? They're not going to ask him to help them move or to put together IKEA furniture. They want to meet with him to put forward alternatives. Basically, what he's saying is that it's a carbon tax or nothing. While Canadians are struggling. And if my Liberal colleague thinks that Canadians are so much better off with this carbon tax, why are there so many Canadians for the first time having to go to food banks? Why are there so many Canadians?
We don't have time. I'm sorry, I'm out of time. I have to let Ms. Collins in.
The carbon tax is driving up the cost of groceries, and the rebate does not cover it, and the Liberals know that.
The only quick point I make is that Mr. Harper didn't meet with premiers from 2009, I think, to 2015. He still refused to meet in the same vein. Ms. Collins, the last word is to you. You are fully supportive, it sounds like, of what the government is doing. You just want them to strengthen things. Why do you think that they need to then meet with the premiers? Would you not see their point in trying to have them adhere to what the Supreme Court laid out they are allowed to do?
First of all, I wouldn't say I fully support what the Liberals have been doing. We've been pushing them to do the right thing when it comes to...
You've been supporting them on every single matter of confidence.
I mean, we have a confidence in supply agreement, which...
You keep the government in power.
We actually force them to deliver on pharmacare, on dental care, on, reducing our emissions, on providing low-income heat pumps. We are actually forcing the government to deliver for Canadians, and we have to drag them screaming and kicking to do it. It takes strong negotiations.
I mean, you're at press conferences together. It doesn't look necessarily like you're cookie taking and screaming, but okay.
I mean, honestly, you can see the kind of legislation that they initially tabled when it comes to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or even their first kicks at the can on the climate accountability legislation. All of these we've had to strengthen. We have to, unfortunately, they always have to be forced into doing the right thing. Canadians right now are facing a climate emergency. We've seen wildfires, extreme flooding, smoke
I understand.
choking
Car
people.
tax and stuff like
And we have a cost of living crisis, and we need support for Canadians.
Okay,
and
I'm sorry, I'm out of time. Like 5 seconds. I'm
Okay.
literally 4 minutes over already.
we have one party who ignores the climate crisis altogether, and the other one who's using it as a political wedge. We need to unite
Which you prop
Canadians.
up. I just have to say that, to be
We-
fair.
We're not using it as a
We're
political
going
wedge.
to keep on pushing them to do the right thing so that we can deliver
Okay.
for Canadians.
I have to leave it there. I appreciate all you making the time for the discussion and the debate. I'm sure it will keep on going. Thank you very much to Leah Taylor-Roy, Andrew Scheer, and